Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on World Suicide Prevention Day. We've got four excellent guests who I'll introduce in just a moment. My name is Phil Moore. I'm a father and a grandfather, and I've been a GP for many years. I work for the Healthy London Partnership as Clinical Co-Director for Mental Health for London, and I co-chair the London Suicide Prevention Group. I'm also chair of the Mental Health Commissioners Network for England. We're going to be talking today and having a conversation about examining the links between digital media, suicide prevention, and social isolation. Very, very topical issues in these days, particularly with the increase in digital over the period of lockdown. Now, we're very aware that discussing anything like this is a very sensitive issue, so please, if you find that you're having things raised for you or you're struggling as a result of hearing any of the stories, we will make sure that there are links on screen that you should be able to see right now that give you some places to contact for some help and support if you do struggle as a result of hearing things in this conversation. We're going to be going for between 3/4 of an hour, and it'll be a free-flowing, open discussion, maybe a few questions, and hopefully you'll find it useful to hear the opinions of the panelists we've got. And let's go straight to introducing our panelists. First of all, we've got Dr. Geraldine Strathdee, who is a consultant psychiatrist and co-founder of the Zero Suicide Alliance. Geraldine, say a little bit about yourself.
Hi, well, I am also, like Phil, I'm a mum and I'm a grandmum, and I have spent 40 years as a clinician in London, particularly working in communities. I was a national clinical director for mental health at one period, and I had the huge privilege of working as the medical director for mental health for London. I am absolutely passionate about Londoners understanding more about mental health, being able to take control, develop good mental health, and prevent the most dreadful tragedy when we don't get things right, which is suicide. I'm really looking forward to hearing these great panelists that I have with me debate this afternoon. Thank you, Phil.
We do indeed look forward to it. Then we've got Ian Russell, who is the founder of the Molly Rose Foundation. Ian, say a little bit about yourself.
Yes, founder of the Molly Rose Foundation, a charity, a small charity. As I've learned, so many charities like ours were set up after a tragedy. And in our case, it was the death of my youngest daughter in 2017, Molly Rose Russell. She died by suicide. And it's perhaps surprising to say we were shocked by her suicide, because you're always going to be shocked by such a tragedy. But Molly was such a normal, wonderful, beautiful, adorable soul, and managed to hide that from us. That I think that's why I used the adjective shock, particularly in this case. I'm sure it applies to everyone, mind you. But and we felt that we needed to do something to raise awareness about mental health issues, and particularly about the effect that modern technology, digital platforms, might have had on Molly's well-being in the run-up to her death, and how that may have influenced her thought processes in that horrible, tragic time.
Thank you, Ian. I'm sure there'll be much more to say as we go through. Phoebe Torrance, you're a papyrus champion and social media influencer. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and papyrus?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, I'm Phoebe, and it's such an honor to be here today with you guys. So I am a creative. I used to be an actress, which led me then on to modeling, and I started directing, which is what gave me, I guess, a platform on Instagram, which gave me the ability to become an influencer. But I've always suffered with really bad mental health. I went through a lot when I was younger, and I lost someone to suicide as well. So it's something that's been really prevalent in my life. When I was, it's like 6 years ago now, I found Papyrus out of research because I wanted to find some volunteering that I could do. And I kind of started volunteering with them and eventually became an champion, and I give talks and I get to do amazing things like this and raise awareness on my platform, as well as finding other ways to get it out and break the stigma.
Thank you, Phoebe. Really appreciate you being open. And finally, we come to, not least, Beth Evans, who is founder of the Sunflower Project. Again, over to you, Beth, to say a little bit about that.
Hi, my name's Beth. I'm from Wales and I'm a student. And I'm the founder of the Sunflower Project, which is a mental health campaign that aims to raise awareness and advocate for change. I basically share my very personal story with suicide, depression, and eating disorders to show the importance of fighting to change society's opinions on mental illness and just mental health in general, and just to prove that hope is real.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Beth. And we look forward to hearing from you. And for everybody watching, we want to encourage you to engage on social media by using the Twitter tags for Thrive London and our panelists, and they're going to appear on screen so that you don't have to look them up or remember them. So if you want to do that, you're very welcome to, and we'd encourage you to do that. Just as an introduction, I want to say a little bit about the Zero Suicide London campaign that Thrive London has been running. Why is that important for London? Whilst London is lower in terms of its suicide rate than many parts of the country, still around 13 Londoners a week take their own lives. And there are estimated to be around 3,000 attempts each month. That's horrendous figures, and we are determined to try and do something about it. So in September 2019, to mark World Suicide Prevention Day a year ago, London's mayor launched a citywide Zero Suicide London campaign, setting a goal of encouraging 100,000 Londoners to access some free online suicide prevention training within 12 months. That's quite a commitment to make. The training was developed by the Zero Suicide Alliance, and it's a free online training that takes about 20 minutes and is designed to show how to have direct and honest conversations about suicide and mental health with friends and family. And the really positive news is over the past year, more than 135,000 Londoners, including the mayor, have now completed the suicide prevention training. And it's good evidence that Londoners are beginning to look out for each other. Thrive London, if you're not aware of it, is a citywide social movement to improve the mental health and well-being of all Londoners. Thrive London manages the Zero Suicide London campaign and is helping to break the stigma of talking about mental health, suicidal thoughts and bereavement, and working towards a really shared goal of becoming a zero suicide city. And this approach follows research that shows very clearly that honestly and openly talking about suicide has helped to save lives. It doesn't provoke people into doing something. It actually takes them away from that tendency. However, significant changes to the way we work and live have happened over the last 12 months. Have you noticed something called COVID-19? And that is contributing to social isolation, which can negatively impact on mental health and well-being. And our panelists are going to be discussing how the increased use of online media platforms during COVID-19 has enabled increased reach for support services and training initiatives, but has also contributed to the spread of misinformation via shared social media that can lead to heightened health anxiety. It's a real blessing and a curse, and that's part of what we want to tease out today. And the idea is this panel discussion is going to give particularly young Londoners a platform to discuss mental health and well-being. It's going to ask young people how social media can be used to strengthen support networks and create positive social change, and also to increase signposting towards support for those who may be struggling, particularly as a result of some of the ill effects of social media. So that's just a background for it. And we're going to kick off, and I want to start with a question for Geraldine, if we may. Geraldine, how do you think community-based suicide prevention initiatives can be implemented, and what do you think they should look like?
So, Phil, you've really hit on the core mission of the Zero Suicide Alliance, of which I have the absolute privilege to be one of the co-founders. So we became an alliance because so many people, members of NHS organisations, educational, schools, colleges, universities, businesses, were coming to us and saying, we would love to do something more about suicide prevention and positive mental health. And this was even before COVID, but we actually don't know what's the best way to set about it. We see so much on the digital world, but we just can't get to the absolute crux of what it is we need. So what people asked us to do was to go off and design some training. So as you rightly said, and amazing that London has embraced the training, we set off to do training, which fundamentally has its messages. Everyone, every person, everywhere, in every community can take action. Yes. So our training is customized depending on the sorts of people that might access it, whether you're a professional person, whether you're a taxi driver, a hairdresser, whether you're a citizen working in local government. The training is customized so that you can look at it and see if it's someone like you, how would you start a conversation with someone about suicide? How would you help them get the kind of help that they need? It's training that what is very interesting about the COVID world is that before COVID, we had about 500,000 people had done the training. With COVID coming, as more and more people sought to use the internet, and as I think loneliness and isolation and the worry of COVID became a real thing, we doubled. We are right up to 1.3 million people who have now accessed the training. So we would start with doing what people ask, and people say, please help us with the training. I can go on later when colleagues have spoken to talk about how we are making it real for every MP, every head of a council, every leader of a local organisation. How can they look at our website and what can we do to help spread the messages across whole communities?
Okay, just before we go to the other panellists, Geraldine, do you want to say a word or two about Zero Suicide Alliance's new Step Up Social Isolation module?
Yes. So we, as I've said, we are an organisation that we want and we have worked to be. We respond to what our members asked us for. So when COVID came in, people were asking us for lots of information. And one of the things that we picked up really quite early on were people feeling isolated, lonely, frightened, not sure who to contact. We know with working with wonderful alliance partners like the Samaritans and Papyrus and others, we know that for some people, the internet became, the digital world actually became the place where they could seek support. For other people, as we've heard from colleagues, it became a place where people got more anxious about what was going on. And it also became a place that was actually not there as a means of support for some of our most vulnerable people who don't have any digital access. Either they don't have the money to buy it, or they can't buy it, or they couldn't do it. But responding to the people who said to us, we absolutely, we want people to understand that loneliness and isolation is a real thing. It's really a problem. And if I could just quote one of our wonderful service user experts by experience, Philippa Lawler, who said, this COVID thing kills physically, but this mental illness, this terrible loss of contact with people is a far greater killer. And she sadly described some of her peer service users who had gone on to complete suicide because of the loneliness and isolation.
Right. It's tragic. And it's one of the things that we're all passionate about changing. So the other panelists, what do you think community-based suicide prevention initiatives should look like? You've presumably got some opinions. So who'd like to start off with that? And then we can just go around and have a conversation about this. I think.
I mean, I should say I'm speaking from my lived experience.
Of course.
And I feel other than that, I'm not an expert. So I'm both a sort of ordinary member of society and someone who has got this specific horrible experience that has taught me something. And it's those lessons that I've learned since Molly's death in 2017 that I think have helped focus what I think is needed. And the way I reacted before Molly died by suicide to subjects of mental health and topics like suicide was, if I'm honest, was probably to run away from them. I didn't know how to confront them and how to deal with them. And I thought they were difficult subjects. I've learned the hard way, sadly. Actually, they're far more straightforward and it's a lot easier to talk about them as a very ordinary member of society. And if you do that, it's the biggest step a person can take to preventing suicide. By talking about suicide, you destigmatize it And if you destigmatize suicide, then it's hopeful that someone who may be contemplating suicide or suffering from mental ill health may have more confidence about speaking up about the problems they're facing instead of keeping it to themselves. So I think in terms of the community, it's community and communication. Those two things go together. If there are ways and initiatives to get people to talk, they will find that it's less frightening than they think. It will empower them to be able to step in and help when they have concerns, rather than avoid the issue. And there can be many things. As a small charity, we've produced little help cards that we give out. They have a sort of nice message on one side and a number of support contacts on the other. So people have a limited number of support services like the Samaritans, Papyrus, and other places to go to. So there's a direct, easy step to take. It's less bewildering than it can be when you're confronting with the huge array of services offered online. But it's those cards we're finding as they're being given out in schools and other places, particularly where young people are starting conversations. And it's the conversations that are probably more important than anything else.
So, Ian, from your experience, what is it that settles the fear that people have of talking about it? What is it that makes a difference on that?
I would say I was ignorant. I don't mind admitting to being ignorant about these subjects. And I was ignorant because I didn't want to go there. It's not a thing, understandably, it's not a subject. Death is not a subject we like talking about. You don't talk about death that often around the dinner table. And of all deaths, suicide and the factors that may lead to suicide are probably the hardest thing to talk about.
Yeah.
I do think it's a generational thing. Definitely.
I think it may be easier the younger you are, but I think if it's a generational thing, I think along with other things that have changed across the years, it's because the younger generations and future generations have started to talk about such things sooner. I think one of the things that's really important is to begin sooner. Early intervention is important in terms of helping someone who is struggling and leading them away to safety, away from suicide. And that process can begin in primary schools. That process can begin at a very early age if done carefully. And the sooner it becomes a common, everyday part of our language and our conversation, the sooner it is a thing of strength, and it's nothing to be frightened of. If I fell over and broke my arm, I wouldn't try and hide it from anyone. It might be hard to hide, but I wouldn't try and hide it. I wouldn't try and mend it myself. I'd go and see a doctor or a health professional to get my arm back mended. And now, even now, with what I've learned in these last 2 or 3 years, if I'm struggling with a mental illness, I still think I would think twice about owning up about that and about going to get professional help for that. That's the first step to making a change, I think.
And that's the stigma we've got to change, isn't it? Phoebe, you said you'd lost somebody close to you. What made the difference for you in terms of being able to talk?
Well, it's funny because I actually, I tried to kill myself before I lost my best friend to suicide.
Oh, right.
And, you kind of have all those sorts of, you have so many moments that you think back on, everyone does, and you try and think, what could I have done differently? But no one talks about these things, exactly like you said. Like I didn't tell my parents, I didn't tell my friends. I mean, you'd hide self-harm and all these sorts of things. And it's so crazy how two friends who were so close at such a young age kind of missed that point of contact. And I completely agree with you. It needs to be something that's taught in primary school. It needs to become normal to talk about your mental health. Like Papyrus has had phone calls on their Hope line from children worried about wanting to kill themselves and feeling those horrible suicidal thoughts. It's something that happens to everyone, no matter how good they are at hiding it. And I think like your unfortunate situation and kind of this same thing happened with me where I started to open up to my parents. And now it's something that me, my sister, my whole family, we all talk about openly. I talk about people online with it all the time because I think whenever I speak to someone who's been through something similar, it makes me feel less alone and it makes me feel less crazy and more normal, which it is normal. You know, it's just mental health, and everyone has different variations of how things make them feel.
And of course, as we keep getting told, we all have mental health. How good it is or otherwise is a variation. Beth, you've not come in yet, but you've had similar kind of experiences. Anything in particular make a difference for you being able to really address this?
Yeah, so I unfortunately have a history of suicide attempts also, but I have really found that talking, as we've all said now, talking is so important. Knowledge, communication, and education, these are the things that are going to make a change. Ian, you mentioned about ignorance, and it is so true. And my parents, my mum particularly, she's an incredible support system now, because we've learned together throughout this whole process. And we always say that ignorance is bliss, and it's just like, you know, it's not. And it's just, we need to speak up. Like, we need to continue to speak up and be open and honest and be the forefront of that change, so that other people know that it is safe to talk about suicide and mental health and mental illnesses. Because when I was struggling, there was nobody, I didn't have anybody in my life who had experienced something similar, or that it wasn't talked about if they had. And there was just no one to go to. And I knew that after surviving, that I needed to be that person for other people. I knew that I needed to create a platform that put myself out there, no matter how vulnerable it made myself, to show that we can talk about these things. It might be scary, you know. It certainly wasn't easy to talk about things for the first time, and even now sometimes, you know, it's difficult, it's scary. I still get anxious, and you know, nowhere near as horrific as before, but it's okay to talk about things, and that's exactly what we need to be telling people. Early intervention, teaching that from a young age, that it is okay to talk and be honest about how you're feeling. So yeah.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Beth. Can we just move on to just talk a little bit about social media and the increased use of digital media during COVID-19? How has that impacted individuals' mental health and well-being? Who wants to start?
Honestly, it's like waves. I find I had to delete Instagram off of my phone multiple times just so that I could have a detox. You know, too many hours in the day not doing anything, you find yourself deep on there. And I do believe that social media, especially Instagram for me, because I don't particularly use much else, it's what you create it to be. So if you follow like the right positive accounts, you see positive things. If you engage with things that make you happy, like I follow so many support pages and beautiful graphics and anxiety pages and OCD pages, and it helps me so much when I'm feeling low. I screenshot them, I put them as my wallpaper. But of course, like, even though I do follow lots of those pages, I follow lots that aren't. And there are times where I wake up and I have a terrible day, and for no reason, and you just feel awful. And Instagram or Twitter or whatever is the worst thing you can do for it. It's about listening to your body and your mind and knowing, actually, like, I don't need to reply to anyone. I don't need to post anything. Like, I don't owe anything to anyone. I actually owe it to myself to listen and take a step back. Which isn't that easy.
It isn't that easy. And when you're feeling low and vulnerable, it's very difficult to do what you're saying. Yeah. Ian, obviously, you've had a very bad experience of this. What's your observations?
I think, well, my experience goes back to Molly's death, which predates the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And Molly was apart from being adorable, but she was a very ordinary, normal 14-year-old school child. And didn't actually seem to be much of a social media person. She has two older sisters, and they all had Instagram accounts. They all had Twitter accounts. Molly never had a Facebook account, and she deleted her Twitter account because she didn't use it. So she didn't seem to be that interested in social media. What we discovered, and it was after her death when I was able to dig further into her social media accounts, horrified us, because she had been looking at what is known as online harmful, dangerous content online. And we can only start to guess at how she got into that place. I think that after a suicide, there are always questions, and many of those questions will remain unanswered. But there's a sort of compulsion by those who've lost a loved one to look deeper into the reasons behind and try and understand better and try and learn something. And we looked at Molly's accounts and discovered that there were just subtly disturbing things, not necessarily illegal. And I think that's one of the problems with content, is the stuff that is absolutely legal, but it's still harmful. And one of the quotes, and I'll be very careful with anything I say, but one of the quotes that simply sounds fairly straightforward was a little black and white drawing of a girl looking sad with tears running down her face, all done in sort of pencil, charcoal or something, seemingly. A black and white version with a written caption that just said, "Who would love a suicidal girl?" And to me, that summed up what was tragic with Molly, because that's what she began or ended up believing in. But actually, knowing her and knowing her friends and knowing everything about her, she was one of the most adored people I've ever come across. And I'm not just saying that because I was her dad. She was absolutely one of those people that people delighted being in her company. And I suspect she came across that content because she started to become more mentally unwell. She was moving on that continuum we've talked about, from being well to unwell mentally, that we all move across from time to time. And she probably looked for support online. And there's plenty of support there. As we've said, there's lots of support and there's lots of good advice. But I think what's difficult, especially for someone who's 14, and particularly if they're feeling vulnerable, is to be able to work out where the good advice is and the support that could lead them to a better place, and where the advice that can suck them deeper into a group of people. And I think also the sense of isolation that she may have been feeling from the sort of thoughts she was having, she didn't understand them herself. I should say she left us a few notes, so we've got a glimpse into what she was thinking. She tried to explain some of the thoughts that were going on in her mind before her death. And she didn't understand her depression, as she described it herself. And I think it was normalized in an online community where other people, from what I've seen from her accounts, talked about such things in what might have meant to be a helpful and supportive way, but actually is the wrong direction to be going in, and it normalizes that sort of thinking and sort of excuses that sort of thinking without saying, hey, there may be a different way to think. There may be a way that slowly, day by day, you can move away from this, as both Phoebe and Beth have done, and live much more happy, fulfilled lives.
Yeah. So, Geraldine, in your role in both a consultant psychiatrist and working with the ZSA, have you come across people in a similar thing, being harmed by social media like this?
It's incredibly moving listening to Ian and Phoebe and Beth. And, you know, as someone who, in my role as a clinician over all my years in the NHS, I've had people with my teams who we were trying our best to help go on to complete suicide. And I think, you know, every single one of their faces is something that I remember. And I remember their stories. And if I'm honest, I also remember the absolute feeling of desperation as a clinician. And the more senior I got, the more it felt, knowing what, if it had been available, could have helped those people get the help they needed early, get the support they needed of the right type, so that they and their families would not have to live through this, you know, this incredible tragedies that they do. So I suppose the thing that I think about is yes, there are real risks in the digital world. And I think colleagues on the phone have described it better than I would. But I think the thing that we have to, I suppose, remember is that as short a time ago as 7 years ago, if you looked at all on digital media, all you saw were horrible stories about mental health. Absolutely not something anybody wanted to talk about. If you had a mental health problem, you then couldn't get a visa to go into particular countries. And what we have seen in the British public, and actually hugely facilitated by the social media, is just a groundswell movement of citizens, teachers, employers who actually now get that mental health and the prevention of mental ill health is one of the most important things we can do in our society. And, if I think about most of the digital world, a lot of it is about the physical body. We have a great focus in this country, I think, and you would expect me to say this, Phil, about the physical elements of our lives. How do we look? What's our physical health like? We have first aid. If you do a first aid course, it's about physical first aid. What we are beginning to see, and I think, Phoebe's comments and Beth's comments about generations is very interesting, because I think what we are beginning to see is a groundswell of people saying, but why can't we have mental health first aid? If I'm an employer, why can't I have the same legal requirements to provide good, safe employment, psychologically safe employment? As a school governor, I have really felt it was brilliant to champion getting school children and teachers much better rapid access to psychological health. So I'm absolutely not saying we've solved this. I'm just saying, like most things in life, there's a kind of a swing and a balance. The digital world has been our friend. And the more, I think, as Ian and Phoebe particularly have said, the more we can reduce stigma, the more we can get society to support mental health, then the more we will be able to get the right help for people onto the internet, digitally available, as well as in every single facet of the DNA of people's lives. So people don't have to wait until it feels so difficult, and they don't have to wait because they're so fearful of the stigma that they don't get the help early enough. And that's partly what the Zero Suicide Alliance is trying to do. Everyone, everywhere, can take action in every population. However small an act, it builds up to changing the face of our society with these wonderful new generation Zs and all the rest of it that we've got coming along.
I think. Sorry.
Yes, Ian, please.
I was just going to say, one of the things I'm in a fortunate position, because having started a small charity and told Molly's story, it's enabled me to have access to all sorts of people. And one of those organisations is Tim Berners-Lee's Web Foundation. So on a few occasions, I've met the people who run that foundation, and so Tim himself, the inventor of the World Wide Web, says it is broken. His invention is broken, but it can be fixed. And the lovely thing I think that they've come up with is this concept of a contract for the web, which is sort of mirrors what we all have in life. And that contract says that governments have a responsibility to mend the web. Institutions like companies, corporations, charities, other entities have a responsibility to run their commercial or charitable purposes sensibly and safely on the web. And we all, as individuals, have a responsibility. That responsibility is spread. And you can see with things like the online harms legislation, which is a bit of government legislation going through Parliament now, but that is an attempt by a government, one of the first attempts across the world to make the web safer by regulating what's right and wrong on the web. That's a massive step forward. Recently, we've just had a thing called the Age-Appropriate Design Code introduced. Again, that's a governmental piece of business that should make the web safer. That's fantastic. You've got web companies now saying, I think Nick Clegg was on television just this week saying he welcomes, on behalf of Facebook, who he works for now, he welcomes regulation because Facebook is only 15 years old. It's grown massively in a very short space of time, and it wants help working out what it's doing properly and what it's doing right and what it needs to do better. And then we all need the support, which is there. It's there if you look for it in the right places on the web. And as long as we all link that together and keep talking with each other, and there are opportunities like this to have these discussions, then there's always hope.
That there is indeed, and your work on regulation is obviously having some effect. So well done, Ian.
I was going to say, if we can join up that regulation with the regulation, because I also work for the Care Quality Commission, which is the health regulator. And we are very, very keen to work with people like yourselves and others to get our regulation of digital services and the digital world that we encounter, well-led organizations. We're very keen to get inputs like yours into that regulation as well. Yeah. So joining it up, I agree, would be more powerful.
Right. And Beth, I want to come to you for the flip side of this, because regulation is one side. The other side is, what can you do to strengthen support networks and create positive social change through social media?
So, as Ian was saying about the social media that, sadly, Molly experienced, the darker side. I also, around a similar sort of age, 13, 14, I actually did reach out for help and in person from teachers, family, maybe not in a very direct way, more in a roundabout way. I didn't really know how to communicate exactly what I was feeling. But I have always sort of thought, what if someone has been asking for help and they are getting ignored? Because that sort of happened to me. And that's why I did turn to social media. And that's why I did turn to the internet, and sadly took me down a very dark rabbit hole.
Right.
So basically, I think that it's really important that we are, because there is so many things on the internet that are negative, that unfortunately there is, and until things are made either illegal or there's, a clampdown on what can be put out there and what isn't allowed to be put out there, and etc., then we need to be fighting that and tackling it head on by directly putting the opposite out there, putting out our positive messages and signposting people, encouraging people to talk to someone in person, talk to a doctor, a family member, teachers, anyone in their life that can provide them with some sort of support, and, if needs be, signpost them on further. But that's what social media, in my opinion, needs to be used for at the moment, to encourage that change, not spread misinformation about mental illnesses and just misinformation about anything, really. It doesn't need that. We need to fight that head on with our positive message to just sort of like tackle the stigma.
Do you think, Beth, that social media, as I say, it's about, Facebook's about 15 years old, so it's a teenager. Do you think it's going through that sort of difficult adolescent years? Because I like to think of it growing up and becoming a quite useful member of society by the time, hopefully quite soon, certainly by the time it gets into its 20s.
Yeah, I haven't really thought of it like that, but I guess that would be a good way to put it. Yeah, definitely. I think that, like everything, there's pros and cons to pretty much everything. And it's just, I can't stress it enough, how important it is. Social media isn't going away anytime soon. It really isn't. So what we need to do is we need to be the change, and we just need to sort of drown out the darkness on social media, if I want to put it that way. And, because, it isn't going away. So we just need to try and change it. And
I completely agree with you. Beth, it really, seeing positive things makes such an impact. And the louder we are about finding those safe spaces, and the louder we are about highlighting those people who create positive change, the more that impacts other people. But back to what you said, Geraldine, about training. I did training with Papyrus because to do talks and to also speak to someone who is feeling suicidal, and I wanted to know the best way I can how to talk to someone about it, because every situation is different, and just because it works for me, it might not work for someone else. And And it was really wonderful seeing so many teachers at the training. And I think that goes back to what you said, Beth, about, you asking for help, but not directly asking for help, and teachers kind of not seeing the warning signs. I had the exact same thing. I mean, I had an eating disorder, and I just wouldn't eat, and it kind of just like went under the things. I remember one teacher vividly like squeezed my arm, was like, "Oh, you're all right now." And that's like stayed with me now. And I'm like in my 20s. So these little things that they say that they don't realize can have such a big impact on a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, 13-year-old, and younger as well.
Yeah, no. And also it's just like, I have really vivid memories of being 13, 14, that sort of age, where things are new, scary. You've just moved to secondary school. Everything is changing. And then all of a sudden, mental health, and you're like, no one's ever spoke to me about this, and like now I've got to think about this as well. Like, what is this? I don't understand.
Absolutely.
And I just remember having absolutely no idea, and then sort of approaching a teacher about it, having absolutely no clue like how I would even broach the conversation, and almost getting dismissed, and eventually sort of like labeled as a little bit naughty and inconvenient. My parents would be called because, I wasn't eating in school. Why is she not eating? Why is her attendance so bad? Why is she self-harming? I became sort of labeled as a nuisance, really. And that just added to it and fueled my opinion. I then became better at hiding, and something, as I've got older, I've obviously become much better at communicating what's going on inside my head. And being at university now, when I approached teachers before about various situations that were happening in my life at the time, and I was struggling with, unfortunately, once again, the warning signs were missed. I was ignored. I was dismissed. They didn't have time for me. Things were it was very busy. And I'd just like to say, I don't place blame, but I ask for change. That's what I like to say. I really don't place blame, but I do ask for change. And within universities and schools, I have sort of encouraged teachers to have one-to-ones with students, even if it's once a term, just to get to know students, because that is where we will see, that's where we can start to know what's going on for students. Yeah. It's all well and good to teach them maths, science, but none of that's going to matter if we're not mentally well. And you need to get to know your students on a more personal level, which just isn't happening at the minute. So we need to encourage teachers to talk to their students.
Yeah. Very good points you make, Beth. Phoebe, you regard yourself as an influencer. So what's been your experience, pros and cons, of using social media to help increase awareness of mental health issues?
Honestly, speaking about my mental health issues and in all different degrees has been a huge positive impact for me. I think the first time I did it 3 years ago, it was a bit scary. And I send, when I write big long comments or I talk about it, I still send it to my best friends and my family. I'm like, I know this is really deep, but can you please just read through and tell me if it's okay? Yeah. Because it's scary. I was always branded as an attention seeker because I self-harmed, or because I talked about things like depression that kind of were affecting me. And I think that's such a toxic connotation. And I still do find myself getting caught in those bad habits when I'm posting about those things. But every time I do, I end up speaking to a new person or a few new people who are going through similar things. And I've helped people, and people have helped me inadvertently. Of all different ages. I mean, there are people in their 60s that I speak to about their mental health, and it's just, I don't know them from Adam and they don't know me from Adam. It's just someone to listen to and someone to talk to. And that, for me, has made such a positive impact on my social media.
Yeah. So it's had a benefit for you as well as other people then?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It didn't start off that way, but
No.
I think it's that thing, making other people feel good makes you feel good. And it just does. When you're honest about your situation and what you've been through, and you find one person, even if it's not like 1,000 or 10,000, just one person turning around to you and saying that honestly has changed how I think about everything, that's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah. I'm sure Geraldine can identify with this as I can as a GP. Somebody saying thank you just makes your day. So I can identify with that entirely. Ian, you've been campaigning for regulation. Do you have a vision for what you think suicide-safer online communities will look like?
I think that vision is difficult to have because you need to update it so quickly. The internet changes so quickly. But I think the first steps we need to take are to stop the sort of algorithmic push of content.
Yes.
Some people look at the online world and say it just mirrors our normal everyday life. And I think that might be true if it wasn't for the sort of machine learning and algorithms that drive so much of the internet, particularly social media. Because as soon as you start looking at something, and it might be football teams or something quite innocent and normal, you'll find yourself getting more content based on football teams. And that's great if you're into football teams or if you're into to anything else. If you start going down the rabbit holes, as I think Beth described it, you find you get more of that content. And so even if you're beginning to go, I'm not sure I really want to head in this direction, it's not making me happy, I know absolutely for a fact that online platforms pushed more content of that sort to Molly. And that's why I'm convinced that it helped to make the decision she did, tragically. In fact, one of the platforms went so far as to also go about emailing Molly with suggestions for harmful content to look at, just to make sure she was seeing. That is an algorithm. And as we're finding out about algorithms, they can be very useful and powerful, but that's a sort of badly written algorithm that hasn't got any checks and balances in it. So the first thing that's needed is to really monitor those checks and balances. And I think the social media companies, it all hangs on the social media companies. I think I absolutely don't think, to start off with, I don't think that any social media company made something that it wanted to be harmful. It was done. Yeah. It was done for good reasons, maybe to make money as well, but that's not necessarily a bad reason. But of course, things can be misused. And at the moment, we're sort of letting our children play on the information superhighway. We're letting them play on the motorway of the internet without putting enough controls in to protect them, or without educating people, because, as we've been saying, these things there will be harm. Whatever we do, there will be harm there. So we need to educate people that when you go online, you just need to bear in mind it could be harmful and what you should do about it. Just as we do with our children in terms of, I don't know, crossing the road. We don't say go outside and play. We say go outside and play, but don't go in the road because it might be bad for you. It's not scaring, it's just educating. And it's mirroring what we find acceptable in our everyday society and applying that online. It's not censorship or it's not compromising free speech or any of that. It's making a safe space in the same uncensored free speech way we have in the modern Western world.
And are you hopeful that algorithmic push, you're going to be able to see change when it comes to Phoebe?
So there is going to be change, because one of the new pieces of legislation that's been introduced just in the earlier this month, early September, is this age-appropriate design code. I mentioned it earlier. Right. And that makes platforms, using existing legislation, it's all boring and technical, but it produces a great effect. It makes platforms responsible for how they use the data of anyone aged under the age of 18. And if that data is used in any way to harm them or to their detriment, that becomes illegal. And it has tough sanctions, big fines, and things that can be used to control it. The tech companies have 12 months or just under 12 months now to sort that out and make a change. So I think we will move in the right direction and things will become safer.
Great. Phoebe, you wanted to say something?
It was Beth.
It's Beth. I'm sorry, Beth.
That's okay. That's okay. I just wanted to say as well that about I think, Ian, you were saying that Molly had an email, was it? Yeah.
Yes.
And around when I was younger, obviously accessing a lot of things, found myself on various pages and all that, that were extremely negative and promote horrific things. And I found that because people weren't listening to me in real life, there was always someone willing to listen to me online. And that was what was so sort of messed up about the whole thing. And that's what people need to start to understand, is that if you don't listen to people or ask them questions in real life, in person, there will be someone on the internet who is going to be talking to them, feeding them awful information, wrong information sometimes. And that's why we need to be talking. That's why we need to be communicating with people, because there really is going to always be the devil on the shoulder, always there, willing to suck you in. And we just need to.
Such an important lesson, Beth, that if we don't listen, somebody else is likely to and may not be helpful.
Yeah.
Sadly, our time is almost at an end. I just want to give each of you an opportunity for a final brief comment that you feel you want to summarize some of the real key things that we should be addressing. Where should we start? Let's start with Phoebe.
Oh,
You want time to think?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Geraldine then.
Just in a nutshell, what happens in our digital world is a reflection of what is happening in our society. I absolutely agree with Beth and my colleagues. We have to get it right in people's everyday, non-digital as well as digital life, because otherwise the digital world alone is not going to solve this. We have to change what happens in schools, colleges, universities, employment places, and we have to support the health service that is desperately trying to really increase the help for children and young people.
Yeah, brilliant. Ian?
I think that's absolutely the case. Absolutely the case. I think that in a funny sort of way, one of the things we haven't talked about massively here is COVID and the effects of COVID. We've talked about the effects of the digital world. And I think that's because there's a fundamental problem there. That's what needs to be sorted out. COVID has probably exacerbated that problem and made it worse.
Yes.
But the fundamentals need to get sorted out. And the learning that I've gone through in the most painful of ways is that we need to be prepared to talk about mental health. We need to be prepared to talk about suicide, online, offline, by way of destigmatizing it. It's not a big step to know that actually mental health first aid, as the Zero Suicide Alliance's courses that you can do online in 20 minutes. It's really quick. That basic knowledge will give you confidence to talk to someone. It's the equivalent of CPR. In the old days, if someone was lying on the road with a possible heart attack, I think probably 50 years ago, a lot of people wouldn't have known what to do. I think now more people know about chest compressions and what they should do in order to just keep someone alive until the medical professionals come along. The same is true of mental health first aid. That's all you have to do. It's not a massive deal. So communicate, talk, destigmatize, learn about mental health first aid, and be careful when you're online. Always be careful and support regulation so that the online world can be a safer place and can be the proper, safe, secure, positive place that it was designed to be.
Thank you, Ian. Beth?
Yeah, so I would just sort of say that it's really important that if you're struggling, that please reach out for help, because it feels absolutely awful in the moment. It really, really does. And I totally understand that. And there's so many other people who will understand that as well. But I cannot stress this enough. Please reach out for help, because change is possible and it is so worth it. It really is. There is so much to live for, and there is great things, and you're meant to be here. You're meant to be here. Like, that's all I can say, really. And in the meantime, let's keep fighting for change and working to end the stigma that's attached to mental health.
Well done, Beth. Phoebe? You've had a chance to think now.
Yes, thank you. I got to hear all the wonderful ones. But Beth, that was so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really made my day. But you're exactly right. Like, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think everyone needs to realize, surround yourself with positive things, positive people. You create the environment around you by what you're thinking. And that includes what you're watching and who you're talking to. And remember, social media isn't real life, and people put out what they want you to see. It's not always as simple as that is how that person is feeling. So don't judge a book by its cover. Remember that you don't know what's going on in someone else's shoes.
Thank you. I have been really touched by all of your stories and what you have shared. It's an area that I feel passionately about anyway, but it has increased my understanding just listening to you all, and you've shared some amazing things. And for all of you out there, please connect with your friends and family during breaks, during other times of the day. Don't ignore them. If you see a colleague or family member struggling, talk to them. You're not going to do any harm. You're very likely to help them, and you may prevent a disaster. So reach out and do it. And if any of you are struggling as a result of what we've discussed today, there are some help resources that are going to be on screen at the end of this. Please contact them. Don't ignore it. Listen to what our panelists have said and take action so that you can be safe and enjoy a great life. As Beth said, you're meant to be here. There's a lot to look forward to. Thank you all for taking part. Thank you to our panelists who've been fabulous, and have a good year. Bye for now.
Thank you.